A police sergeant chose the coldest road in Wyoming to avoid the one date he could not forgive himself for. Then he found a young German shepherd shivering in the snow, guarding an old duty bag like it was the last safe thing in the world. Inside that bag, a radio crackled with a voice calling from a mountain station that was slowly failing. The man trapped above the trees was not guarding a secret crime, but 43 forgotten names. Before the rescue was over, the dog, the bag, and an unopened letter would lead two men back to the grief they had tried to outrun. Some memories do not need to be buried. They need someone brave enough to speak them honestly. Share your own touching story with an animal you love, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. January 18th had become a date Sergeant Grant Halvorsen did not need to see on a calendar. 6 years had passed since Nolan Avery died, and Grant still woke before the alarm every January 18th, as if some part of his body had kept better records than the rest of him. He did not take the day off. He never had. Instead, he volunteered for whatever patrol assignment would keep him farthest from town. Paperwork, road checks, welfare calls, winter access inspections. Anything that could be completed, logged, and closed. Tasks were useful because tasks ended. Memory did not. By 7 that morning, Grant had already left Buffalo behind in a Dark County Sheriff SUV and was moving west toward the lower approaches of the Bighorn Mountains. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, but the storm had passed before sunrise. The morning that followed was almost offensively beautiful. The sky was pale blue and clear. Sunlight flashed across untouched fields of white. Lodgepole pines carried clean shelves of snow along their branches, and distant ridges rose sharp and bright against the winter horizon. Grant drove with one hand resting low on the steering wheel. His dark Navy patrol uniform showed beneath a charcoal-insulated sheriff jacket. A black external vest sat close across his broad shoulders, radio microphone clipped near his left collarbone. Short ash-brown hair, silvering heavily at both temples, had been flattened slightly by the knit cap he had removed when the heater grew too warm. Very short gray-brown stubble covered his jaw. A brass trout keychain knocked quietly against the ignition. Grant noticed the sound. He ignored it. Nolan had bought the thing 12 years earlier after a fishing trip, during which neither man had caught anything larger than an offended-looking trout that slipped free before Grant could get it into the boat. Nolan had called the trip a tactical withdrawal from fish. Grant had told him to shut up. The trout keychain had stayed. So had the silence that came later. Grant turned onto a county access road, leading toward a campground closed for the winter. The road had not been plowed since the previous afternoon. His tires pressed through several inches of dry powder, leaving 2 dark tracks that sunlight immediately began softening at the edges. He slowed near the wooden gate. Something dark lay beside the snowbank ahead. At first, Grant thought it was a coat. People left strange things near seasonal roads: trash bags, broken coolers, sleeping bags that had blown from truck beds. He was already reaching for the radio microphone when one pointed ear moved. Grant stopped the SUV. For several seconds, he watched through the windshield. A young German shepherd lay curled beside the road. The dog was black and tan, though snow and damp fur muted most of the color. Its legs looked too long for its thin body. Ribs showed beneath the coat. One ear stood upright, the tip of the left ear folded forward. Beneath the dog's chest was an old olive-green duty bag. One front paw rested tightly across the carrying strap. Grant switched off the engine. The dog raised its head, amber-brown eyes fixed on him. "Okay," Grant said quietly. The dog did not move. Grant stepped out. Cold air cut through the open edge of his jacket. The mountain smelled like pine, frozen dirt, and clean snow. He stopped about 15 feet away. The shepherd watched him with the particular stillness of an animal that had already spent too much energy deciding whether people were dangerous. Grant lowered himself into a crouch. "I'm not coming closer." The dog's ears shifted. Grant returned to the SUV, took out a collapsible bowl, poured warm water from a thermos, and found several strips of dried beef in an emergency ration pack. He placed both on the snow halfway between them. Then he backed away. Hunger won first. The shepherd crawled forward. It ate too quickly. Grant almost stopped it, then decided the portions were small enough. The dog drank several laps of water. For one moment, its attention left the bag. Then the shepherd froze. It turned. The old duty bag sat several feet behind it. The dog scrambled backward so quickly that its rear leg slipped. It returned to the canvas, lowered its body across it, and placed one paw over the strap again. A weak growl came from its chest. Grant studied the animal. "That matters to you?" The growl stopped. Not agreement, just exhaustion. Grant looked around. A narrow line of disturbed snow led from the roadside toward a maintenance shelter set back among the trees. Beside the paw prints ran a shallow groove. Something had been dragged. Grant followed the marks. Inside the shelter, he found a folded thermal blanket in one corner, an empty metal food bowl, and a plastic water jug with a rim of ice forming around the top. Someone had not simply dumped the dog here. Someone had tried to help it. Grant touched the door. The upper hinge had torn partially from the frame. Wind could have forced it open. He stood for a moment inside the little shelter, listening to the dry tap of the loose door against the wood. There were many ways to leave something behind. Some of them looked like accidents. Some looked like choices made too quickly. Grant did not like where that thought went. He walked back outside. The dog was exactly where he had left it. Then the duty bag crackled. Grant stopped. Static came again. The shepherd lifted its head sharply. A voice broke through the noise. "Pine Watch Station calling any unit monitoring this channel." Grant stared at the bag. The radio transmitted again. "Pine Watch Station, any unit monitoring." Grant approached slowly. The shepherd's body tightened. "All right," Grant said. "I need one thing." A low warning came from the dog. Grant stopped within arm's reach. He did not grab the bag. Instead, he opened the outer pocket just enough to see a handheld VHF radio inside. "I'm taking the radio. The bag stays." The dog watched every movement. Grant removed the radio. The paw remained on the strap. He pressed the transmit button. "Pine Watch Station, this is Sergeant Grant Halvorsen, Johnson County Sheriff's Office. I'm at the South Campground Access Road. Go ahead." Static filled the channel. Then an older man answered. "Sergeant, that is the best voice I've heard all morning." Grant glanced at the dog. "You missin' a German shepherd?" A pause. "No." The answer came slowly. "I found him." The man identified himself as Everett Langford, 73, retired park ranger and former Army communications specialist. He had found the shepherd near a roadside rest area shortly after dawn. The dog had been cold, hungry, and unwilling to come close until Everett put down food. Everett had brought it to the maintenance shelter, left water and a blanket, and planned to return after checking Pine Watch Station. "How long was the check supposed to take?" Grant asked. 40 minutes. "How long have you been up there?" Another pause. "Longer." Grant looked toward the road climbing into the trees. Everett explained that he had taken the duty bag into the shelter because it contained documents he did not want sitting unattended in his vehicle. When he tried to leave with it, the shepherd panicked. "So you left the bag." "I was coming back." "And forgot the handheld was inside." "I had the fixed radio at Pine Watch." Grant looked down at the old VHF in his hand. "That decision aging well?" "No." Grant almost smiled. Almost. Then Everett's voice changed. "The east stairs came down about an hour ago." Grant straightened. "What do you mean, came down?" "Snow load pulled part of the exterior assembly with it. I'm on the upper level." "Any injuries?" "No major ones." Grant heard the hesitation. "Everett." My left hip objects to the word minor. Grant looked at the shepherd again. The dog had lowered its head, but remained alert. And your heat? Out. Grant's expression hardened. He switched channels and contacted County Dispatch. Within minutes, Dana Whitmore joined the radio traffic from the Emergency Coordination Center. Grant knew Dana by voice before he heard her name. She was 44, precise, calm, and famous among deputies for sounding most controlled when everyone else had started making bad decisions. "Grant, give me coordinates." He did. "Structural condition?" "Exterior east stairs collapsed, upper floor occupied, heat failure, subject responsive." "Weather?" "Clear here, fresh accumulation, access road unplowed." Dana answered immediately. "SAR is mobilizing from the north approach. Multiple trees are down across that route. Current estimate to lower staging is 1 hour 50 minutes. Grant looked up toward the mountain. "That's a long time without heat." "I know." No false comfort. That was why Grant trusted her. Dana continued. "You are authorized to assess south access. Assessment only. Do not convert this into a technical rescue without coordination." Grant looked at the road. "Understood." "I mean it." "So do I." Grant ended the transmission. The shepherd tried to stand. Its legs trembled. Grant crouched. "Here's the deal. You're getting warm." The dog gave him no sign that it had accepted the deal. Grant lifted the emergency blanket first, then slid one arm carefully beneath the shepherd's chest and another beneath its rear legs. The dog resisted weakly. The moment Grant moved it away from the duty bag, panic flashed through its eyes. "All right." Grant lifted the bag with his free hand. The shepherd stopped struggling. Inside the SUV, Grant placed the dog on the passenger side floor, wrapped in the blanket. He set the olive bag behind the center console. The shepherd immediately leaned toward it. Grant studied the uneven black mask around the dog's right eye, the folded ear, the stubborn paw stretching toward the canvas. "You need a name until somebody tells me yours." The shepherd stared back. "Patch?" No reaction. "Strong endorsement?" Grant started the SUV. Before shifting into drive, he moved the duty bag farther back to clear his gear. Patch forced himself upright. His front paws slipped on the floor mat as he tried to follow it. Grant stopped. He moved the bag forward again. Patch settled instantly. Grant looked at him for several seconds, then at the trout keychain hanging beside the steering column. For 6 years, Grant had survived January 18th by keeping everything that mattered at a manageable distance. This half-frozen dog seemed to believe distance itself was the danger. Grant put the SUV into four-wheel drive. "It's staying with us." Patch lowered his head beside the old canvas bag. The sheriff vehicle moved past the winter gate and began climbing the white road toward Pine Watch. The south access road climbed faster than it looked from below. From the campground gate, it had seemed almost gentle, a white lane curving through pine and open slope. Once the sheriff SUV entered the trees, the mountain began correcting that impression. Snow narrowed the road from both sides. Low branches bent under ice and brushed the roof with soft scraping sounds. Beneath the powder, the old gravel held ruts from maintenance trucks, now hidden well enough to punish anyone who drove, as if the road still remembered them. Grant kept both hands on the wheel. Patch lay on the passenger side floor, wrapped in the emergency blanket. The dog's nose pointed toward the olive duty bag wedged behind the center console. Every time the vehicle rocked, Patch stretched one paw until it touched the canvas. Grant noticed. He said nothing. Dana Whitmore's voice came over the radio. "Halvorsen, position." Grant read the coordinates from the unit mounted near the dash. "Copy," Dana said. "SR is still clearing the north approach. Your current assignment remains access assessment only." "Understood." "I'm repeating it because deputies have historically treated the word assessment like a suggestion." Grant glanced at the road ahead. "Those sound like deputies you should discipline." "I try. They keep aging into supervisors." Grant allowed himself half a breath of amusement. Then the road bent sharply left and ended at a fallen pine. The trunk crossed from the uphill side and disappeared into the snowbank beyond the opposite shoulder. Its branches formed a frozen green wall. There was no room to drive around it without putting the right wheels too close to the drop. Grant stopped 20 feet short. Patch lifted his head. "Stay," Grant said. The dog did not know the command, but exhaustion helped compliance. Grant stepped out into the cold and studied the tree. The trunk was thick enough that cutting it with the folding saw in the vehicle would waste time and energy. Pulling the entire tree clear was not realistic, but the crown had fallen into loose powder. If he could rotate the top section downhill a few feet, he might open enough space to pass. He reported the obstruction to Dana. Another voice joined the channel before she answered. "Grant, this is Owen Rusk." Grant had not heard Owen's voice in more than a year, but he recognized the clipped mountain calm immediately. Owen Rusk ran the volunteer county search and rescue team with the steady impatience of a man who had seen too many competent people make one emotional decision and call it instinct. He was 46, broad through the chest in a climber's compact way, with sandy brown hair cut close and a scar through his left eyebrow from an old rock fall that had become part of his expression. "I'm listening," Grant said. "Good. Then hear this clearly. Being able to do something and being cleared to do it are different things." Grant looked at the fallen pine. "I know." "Then prove it." Grant breathed once through his nose. Owen had never been impressed by uniforms, rank, or old training. That had made him useful during rescues and annoying everywhere else. "I have a manageable obstruction," Grant said. "Using the front winch to rotate the crown, no personnel in the line of pull, I'll walk the gap before moving through." "Describe the anchor." "Vehicle mounted, straight pull at first, then shallow angle. I'm moving the top, not the trunk." "Cable blanket?" "In the rear compartment." "Use it." Grant almost said he knew. Instead, he said, "Copy." He wrapped the recovery line around the narrower section of the trunk, set the cable blanket, checked the angle, and returned to the SUV. Patch was no longer on the floor. The dog had climbed clumsily onto the passenger seat and was staring toward the duty bag, which had slid back several inches. "Seriously?" Patch's folded ear trembled with the effort of staying upright. Grant moved the bag closer. Patch settled again. The winch motor hummed low and steady. Snow fell from the branches in heavy clumps. The tree shifted, stopped, then groaned as the crown rotated toward the downhill shoulder. Grant paused twice to adjust the line. No drama, no grand risk, just slow work, in cold air. When a narrow passage opened, he walked it first, boots testing the packed snow at the inside edge. The uphill bank held firm. The downhill shoulder remained soft. He drove through with inches to spare. Only after the rear tires cleared the branches did Owen speak again. "Acceptable." Grant keyed the mic. "I'll try to contain my gratitude." "You do that." The road rose into denser timber. The bright morning changed under the canopy. Sunlight came in broken strips. Shadows blurred the road surface, making shallow dips look level and hard ice look like ordinary snow. Everett Langford's voice came through the handheld VHF Grant had set in the cup holder. "Sergeant?" "I'm here." "So am I, apparently." Grant watched the road. "Still on the upper floor?" "Yes." "Any change in pain, dizziness, confusion?" "I am confused by many of my life choices." "Specific to today?" "Hip hurts, hands are cold. Pride is unstable." Grant heard Dana take notes silently on the other channel. "Keep talking," Grant said. "Move your fingers. Don't stand unless I ask you to." I used to give instructions like that." Then you know how irritating they are. A weak laugh crackled through the radio and faded into static. The road opened onto a white slope. For a moment, Grant could see down through the trees. The campground gate had vanished behind falling ground and branches. His tire tracks already looked old, their edges softened by wind. He thought about Nolan then, not because he wanted to. Nolan had hated winter driving, but loved winter arguments. He would lean back in the passenger seat with coffee balanced dangerously between his knees and explain why Grant's route choices lacked imagination. "You navigate like a man who distrusts adventure," Nolan had said once. "I navigate like a man who plans to arrive," Grant had answered. Nolan had laughed as if that proved his point. Grant tightened his grip on the wheel. Pat shifted below him and pressed one paw harder against the bag. The road narrowed again after the slope. At the next switchback, the right side dropped into a ravine. Not a cliff, not the kind of thing people dramatized, just steep enough that a vehicle sliding sideways would keep sliding longer than any deputy wanted to think about. Grant stopped before the bend. He got out with a folding shovel and chipped through the snow near the front tire path. The shovel struck ice. Clear, hard ice sloped gently toward the drop. Grant walked 50 yards ahead, testing with one boot and then the shovel. The curve beyond was worse. The old road disappeared under wind-packed snow. Even if he crossed the ice, turning around later would be uncertain. He stood there for a long moment. The younger version of himself would have measured the risk differently. Not because he had been reckless, that was too easy an excuse. Young Grant had simply believed that competence could bargain with consequences. Older Grant had learned consequences did not negotiate. He returned to the SUV. Dana asked for the report. "Vehicle movement ends here," Grant said. There was no hesitation in Dana's answer. "Good decision." Grant looked at the white road ahead. "It doesn't feel like one." "Most good decisions don't when someone is waiting." Owen came back on. "Mark vehicle position. Beacon on. Wheel chocks. If you continue on foot, you are still assessing until circumstances change. Say it back." Grant exhaled. "I am still assessing until circumstances change. And I don't improvise a technical rescue without coordination." "Good. I enjoy hearing adults speak." Grant opened the rear compartment and began preparing. Climbing harness, compact rope, locking carabiners, first aid kit, headlamp, emergency blanket, hand warmers, a small traction kit. He took the rescue sling from the maintenance shelter gear he had collected below and clipped it to his pack. The duty bag was heavier than he expected. Not impossibly heavy, carefully heavy, as if whoever packed it had decided every item deserved its own place. Patch tried to stand when Grant lifted the bag. "No," Grant said. "You're not walking this section." Patch disagreed with his entire body. Grant fitted the rescue sling around the dog and lifted him against his chest, high enough to keep the dog warm beneath the edge of his jacket. Patch twisted immediately, struggling to look behind Grant's shoulder at the bag. "Easy." Patch did not become easy. Grant adjusted the strap until the duty bag rode high across his back and one of its canvas handles came around near his left side. Patch stretched a paw and touched it. The change was immediate. The dog stopped fighting. Grant stood in the snow, feeling the small weight of that paw against the old strap. "You are a very specific kind of difficult." Patch blinked slowly. They left the SUV behind. On foot, the mountain sounded different. No engine, no heater fan, no tire crunch under a chassis. Just Grant's boots compressing snow, the muted clink of metal on his harness, Patch's breathing inside the sling, and Everett's voice breaking through the radio in uneven intervals. Red trail markers appeared on trees every 50 yards, though several were hidden under ice. Grant moved carefully, not quickly, Speed made people sloppy in cold conditions. Sloppy made other people carry them. After half a mile, the terrain leveled enough for Patch to walk. Grant lowered him into the snow and clipped a short lead from the dog's simple shelter collar to his own harness. Patch's legs trembled, but once his paws touched the ground, his posture changed. He sniffed the air, then the snow, then the bag. He moved forward with his nose close to the trail. Grant did not mistake that for a miracle. The red markers were still guiding them. Everett Station was still uphill. Patch was not solving anything. But the dog recognized something. The track of Everett's snowmobile, under fresh powder perhaps. The smell of wool and old canvas. The thin thread of human kindness buried beneath cold. Grant followed him for 20 yards before speaking into the radio. "Everett, what's in the bag?" Static. Then Everett said, "It doesn't belong to me." That wasn't the question. No. Grant waited. Patch stopped, turned his head, and pressed his nose briefly to the canvas strap where it hung near Grant's side. Everett's voice returned, weaker but steady. "Names?" Grant looked at the bag. "Say again." "Names, a few flags, photographs, letters, transfer forms, working copies of records from the Veterans Chapter, not the full archive, before you lecture me." "I wasn't lecturing yet." "You were preparing." Grant stepped over a buried branch. "Why were you carrying them to a mountain station?" "I wasn't taking them to the station. I was taking them to the county archive after the station check. Thought the check would take 40 minutes. Thought the weather would hold. Thought several things, apparently." The wind moved through the trees above them. Everett continued. "Some of those men and women don't have anyone left who knows where their names belong." Grant did not answer. He had heard people talk like that before, usually at funerals, usually right before everyone went home and left the hardest work to whoever was too stubborn to put down the folding chairs. Patch moved ahead again. The trail turned across a steeper slope where wind had scraped the upper snow thin. Ice showed beneath the powder in dull blue patches. Grant stopped. He clipped a safety line around a pine trunk before crossing. "Dana, Owen, I have a short traverse with ice under light snow. Establishing a hand line. Dog is on short lead. Bag secured." Owen answered. "Slow feet. 3 points. Don't trust the white layer." "Copy." Grant moved sideways, placing each boot before shifting weight. Patch stayed close, pulled more by the lead and Grant's pace than his own strength. Halfway across, the snow under Grant's downhill boot broke loose. It was not large, not the kind of slide people named afterward. But it moved fast enough. Grant dropped to one knee and caught the line. The duty bag slipped from his shoulder. For one suspended second, the canvas slid across his back, brushed Patch's side, and dropped onto the slope. Patch lunged. His teeth closed around the strap. "Patch!" The bag kept sliding. Patch was dragged half a step before the short lead snapped tight against Grant's harness. The bag struck something under the snow, caught, slipped again, then stopped against a buried root. Grant braced on the rope, heart suddenly louder than the wind. "Hold still!" Patch did not understand or did not care. His jaws remained locked on the strap. Grant crawled downhill, keeping one hand on the safety line. Snow slid under his knees. He reached the bag handle, pulled it up against his chest, and then gathered Patch by the sling webbing. "Let go." Patch stared at him with fierce amber eyes. "Let go." The dog did not. Grant had to pry the strap free with gloved fingers. He dragged the bag, Patch, and himself back above the broken layer, then rolled onto his back in the snow. For several seconds, he only breathed. Patch stood over the bag, sides moving hard. Grant checked the dog's paws, legs, chest, then his own knee. Nothing worse than a scare. A foolish scare, the kind that became serious if a person lied to himself afterward. He pressed the radio. Minor slide. No injuries. Bag slipped. Dog grabbed it. We're above the traverse." Owen's voice sharpened. "Stop there." "I am stopped." "Good. Take 2 minutes." Dana added, quieter. Everett heard that. Grant looked at the radio. Everett came through after a moment. "Dog still with you?" Grant looked at Patch, who still had one paw on the canvas. "Yes." A breath of relief crossed the channel. "That's good." Grant sat up slowly. He looked at the duty bag, then at Patch. "The bag can be replaced," Grant said. Patch watched him. "You can't." Patch leaned forward and sneezed directly into Grant's face. The laugh escaped before Grant could stop it. It was short. Surprised. Real. The sound seemed almost disrespectful in the cold air. Grant wiped snow and dog breath from his face. For 1 second, the mountain was only a mountain. The dog was only a stubborn, half-frozen shepherd, and Grant was only a man sitting in the snow after being startled into laughter. Then January 18th returned. Nolan was still gone. The missed call still existed. Grant had not earned the laugh, and he hadn't asked for it, but there it was. Patch lowered his head onto the duty bag as if the matter had been settled. Grant looked at him for a long moment. For 6 years, Grant had treated every good thing on this date as something that had to be refused before it could become betrayal. No one had told him that rule. He had written it himself. He stood, tightened the bag strap across his shoulder, and lifted Patch back into the sling for the next climb. "Come on," he said, voice rougher than before. "We're not done." Patch's paw found the canvas again. Together, they continued upward through the bright, dangerous snow. By late afternoon, the light had changed. The clear winter brightness that had made the lower road look almost peaceful was gone now, replaced by a flatter silver tone that settled across the trees and made every distance harder to judge. Grant felt it in his knees first, not pain exactly. A warning. His old left knee stiffened whenever cold, elevation, and pride gathered in the same place. He ignored none of it. Ignoring things was how men ended up needing rescue from people who had warned them. Patch rode against his chest in the rescue sling again, quieter now, but not asleep. The young shepherd's head rested below Grant's collarbone, his amber eyes watching the trail as if he understood that stopping was no longer the same thing as resting. The olive duty bag rode high across Grant's back. Every few minutes, Patch stretched one paw until he could touch the strap. Grant had stopped commenting on it. The red trail markers led through one final stand of lodgepole pine. Beyond them, the ground opened into a clearing cut against the slope. Pine Watch Station stood above the trees. It was taller than Grant had expected. The old structure sat on a raised wooden platform, its upper room wrapped in windows on 3 sides. Weather had grayed the boards, and snow had gathered thickly along every ledge. The eastern stairs were gone, not damaged, gone. Broken rails and support beams lay scattered below the platform, partly buried under snow. A section of railing stuck out at an angle, like a snapped rib. The western wall still stood, mostly. Beneath one high window, a narrow awning bowed under a white load that looked too heavy for anything made by human hands to carry for long. Grant stopped at the edge of the clearing. Patch saw the figure first. The dog jerked hard in the sling and barked once, sharp enough to echo against the station. A man appeared behind the upper western window. Everett Langford was visible from the shoulders up. White hair escaped beneath a burgundy knit cap. His face looked narrow behind the glass, his light eyes set deep by cold and exhaustion. One hand pressed against the window. The other lifted in a slow, careful motion. Patch barked again. Everett leaned closer to the glass. For a moment, the clearing changed. Everett was no longer just a voice on a radio. Patch was no longer just a dog that had chosen a bag. There was a line between them, thin as breath in cold air, and Grant understood that the dog had not been guarding property. He had been waiting for the first safe person he remembered to come back. Grant set Patch down only long enough to take out his phone. "Dana, I have visual on Pine Watch. Send structure video if signal allows." Grant stepped carefully along the clearing's edge, staying outside the obvious fall zone. He filmed slowly, missing east stairs, damaged rail, sagging awning, western wall, upper maintenance window, roof load. The file failed once, then again. On the third attempt, it went through. While he waited, Everett's voice crackled from the handheld radio. "You made better time than I expected." Grant looked up. "I had help." Patch, back in the sling, made a low, urgent sound. Everett's face softened. "That him?" "Yes." "Tell him I said he disobeyed clear instructions." Grant glanced down at the dog. "He looks devastated." "He always was difficult. You knew him less than a morning. Some personalities are efficient." Dana came back on the channel. "I have the video. Owen is reviewing it. Stand by." Another voice entered a few seconds later, breathless and tight with guilt. "This is Miles Farrow. I maintain Pine Watch." Grant turned slightly away from the wind. "Go ahead, Miles." Miles spoke quickly, as if every word had been waiting behind his teeth. "The west wall was reinforced 8 years ago after wind shear damage. There's a maintenance window above the old cable housing. It opens inward. Frame should hold. Do not put weight on the awning. Do not touch the awning. Do not breathe in the direction of the awning if you can help it." Grant studied the wall. Miles continued, calmer only because facts steadied him. "There are exterior braces under the siding seams. You'll see darker vertical lines where the snow didn't stick evenly. Those are your better contact points. Northwest trim is rotten. Avoid it." "You sound like you wanted to be here," Grant said. Silence followed. Then Miles answered, "I was supposed to be." Grant did not ask more. There was too much in the sentence, and none of it would help Everett get down. "Then be useful from where you are." A breath crackled over the radio. "Copy." Owen came in next. "Grant, you're not approaching that wall on one line." "I wasn't planning to." "I don't care what you were planning. I care what you can prove. I want primary and backup. Anchor outside the awning fall zone. Test both under load. If the wall shifts, you come down. If the roof releases, you are already out of the path. Say it back." Grant looked at the station. The awning gave a small, dry creak. Patch heard it and turned his head. Grant said, "Primary and backup. Anchor outside fall zone. Load test before leaving ground. Descend if wall shifts. Stay clear of roof release path." Dana's voice followed. "No one is ordering you to climb." Grant understood the importance of that sentence. If he went up, it would be his decision. Not because protocol demanded it, not because ego demanded it, because the man behind the glass was losing warmth faster than help could reach him from below. "Understood?" Everett's voice came weakly through the VHF. "For the record, I object to all this fuss." Grant looked up at him. "Your objection has been logged and ignored." "Efficient." Grant carried Patch to a sheltered place beneath a low rock shelf at the clearing's edge. Pine branches hung over it, blocking most of the wind. He laid the emergency blanket down, then clipped Patch's temporary collar to a short tether around a buried root he tested twice. The dog resisted, eyes fixed on Everett's window. "I know," Grant said. Patch whined. Grant placed the olive duty bag beside him. Patch immediately put one paw over the strap. The whine stopped. Grant crouched a moment longer. "This stays with you." Patch kept staring past him at the station. Grant added, quieter, "And I come back." He did not know why he said it. Maybe because the dog needed to hear it. Maybe because Grant did. The climb took shape slowly. That was what fear did properly handled. It became steps. Grant wrapped a wide sling around the pine trunk Owen approved from the video angle. He set the primary line, then a separate backup around the same trunk with a different angle and independent connection. He checked each locking carabiner with gloved fingers, then checked them again because cold made touch less trustworthy. Owen made him describe every component. Dana kept Everett talking. Miles identified the braces. Grant clipped in and put his weight on the system while still on the ground. Once, twice. He leaned back until the rope held him fully. No shift, no sound from the anchor. The station creaked in the wind. Grant began climbing. He did not climb like a younger man trying to prove something. He climbed like a man who understood that gravity accepted no explanation afterward. His boots found narrow edges in packed snow and old timber. His hands moved from rope to brace to rope again. He kept most of his weight on the system, touching the building only long enough to advance. Patch barked once below. Grant did not look down. "Status," Owen said. 10 feet up. System holding. Wall stable." Hands? Functional. Knee? Grant paused. Annoyed? That is not a medical category. "It is in law enforcement," Dana cut in. "Everett, tell me what you see out the north window." Static. Then Everett answered, slower than before. "Pines. Ridge. Weather vane that has lied since 1998. Dana's voice sharpened slightly. "Stay with me, Everett." Grant heard the change. It moved something inside him faster than the cold. He climbed. Halfway to the maintenance window, wind struck the station from the north and curled along the wall. It shoved Grant sideways. His shoulder hit timber hard enough to steal his breath. The wall gave a long, wooden complaint. Grant froze. No one spoke for half a second. Then Owen said, "Report." "Shoulder impact. No loss of grip. Wall movement minimal." "Pain?" "Not relevant." "It is if you need that arm." Grant flexed his fingers around the rope. "Arm works." Below, Patch had stopped facing Grant. The dog stared up past him, at the roof line. Grant followed the angle just as a sheet of snow began to slide. "Roof release," he said. He flattened himself against the wall. The snow came down in a heavy white curtain, spilling past the edge of the roof and striking lower braces below him. It missed by several feet, but the force of it shook powder into the air until the world narrowed to white and timber and rope. Grant stayed still until the last chunks fell. His heart worked harder than he liked. Miles spoke into the radio, voice unsteady. "There's a drift pocket above the northwest corner. I didn't know you were that far west." "That would have been useful earlier." "I know." Dana cut between them. "Focus." Grant resumed climbing. The maintenance window was set just below the western roof line. Its frame had iced around the edges. He hooked one arm through the rope, cleared snow from the sill, and tried the latch. It did not move. Everett appeared inches away behind the glass. Up close, the old ranger looked worse. His face had gone pale beneath the weathered color of years outdoors. His white mustache trembled with his jaw. He wore a forest green ranger coat over layers that had stopped being enough. Grant lifted the radio toward his mouth. "At window, latch frozen." Miles said, "The latch plate is old brass. Pry from the lower right, not the center. Center will split the frame." Grant pulled a compact pry tool from his belt. He worked the edge slowly under the latch plate. The wood resisted. Grant shifted the angle. A sharp crack sounded. For one bad second, he thought the frame had failed. Then the latch gave. The window opened inward. No warmth escaped, only stale air, cold wood, and the smell of machine oil. Grant climbed inside. The upper room was small, crowded, and dim. A fixed VHF radio sat on a desk beside a battery indicator with a weakening green light. Old maps covered one wall. Maintenance logs, spare fuses, and weather instruments filled the shelves. In the corner, a long metal box wrapped in waterproof covering rested beneath a bench. Everett sat against the desk in a silver emergency blanket. "You look younger on the radio," Grant said. Everett blinked slowly. "You look less annoying from a distance." Good. Still oriented, Grant knelt and checked him. Responsiveness, pulse, coordination, skin temperature. Everett could answer questions, but his hands shook too badly to manage straps. "Early hypothermia signs," Grant reported. "Responsive, shivering, delayed answers, left hip pain, preparing assisted lower." Dana acknowledged. Owen asked, "Harness fit?" "Working on it." Grant secured the rescue harness around Everett's chest and thighs, keeping the movement controlled and respectful. Everett tried to help twice and made both attempts worse. "Stop assisting," Grant said. "I dislike being cargo." "You can file a complaint on the ground." Everett's eyes moved to the metal box. "That comes." Grant followed his look. "No?" Everett's gaze sharpened. "Yes." "Everett, extra weight increases risk." "It comes." Grant stared at him. "What's inside?" The old man was quiet long enough that the building seemed to answer for him with another creak. Then Everett said, "Someone who's waited long enough." Grant did not understand, but he recognized the tone. There were items people owned, and there were items people had failed to face for so long the object became heavier than its contents. Grant stood, lifted the box, and clipped it to a separate lowering line. "Then he goes first." Everett did not correct the word. Grant guided the metal box out the window and lowered it away from the awning zone. Owen confirmed when it reached the snow below. Through the window, Grant saw Patch stand against his tether, then stop at the limit of the line, one paw still on the duty bag. Grant turned back. "Your turn." Everett's jaw tightened. Together they moved to the open window. The wind struck the old ranger's coat as soon as Grant brought him near the opening. Everett's hands clamped onto the frame. Grant waited. He did not pull. He did not speak too quickly. Some commands became harder because they were simple. "Everett," the old man looked at him. "Let go." Everett's eyes flicked toward the drop, then to Grant, then past him toward the room he had expected to leave by stairs. For a second, Grant saw more than fear of falling. He saw the terrible insult of needing another man's hands. Then Everett released the frame. Grant transferred the weight gradually. Owen counted distance over the radio, while Grant fed the rope through the system. 10 feet. Everett swayed but stayed upright in the harness. 8. The awning below groaned. Miles spoke sharply. "Move him west. Get him clear of the wall." Grant increased the descent, controlled, but faster. 4. The awning cracked. Everett's boot struck snow. He stumbled, rolled once, and dragged himself toward the rock shelf. "Clear!" Owen shouted. The awning collapsed. Timber, ice, and snow crashed into the space directly below the maintenance window. The impact shook the western wall. Grant swung hard against the inside frame. The radio slipped from his shoulder clip and dangled by its cord. For several seconds, the channel carried only static and the sound of the building vibrating under him. "Grant," Dana said. He held the rope, waited for the wall to stop complaining, and forced his breathing to remain even. Below, Patch barked again and again. Grant caught the radio. "I'm here." Dana exhaled once. It was almost too controlled to be relief. "When this is over," she said, "we are going to discuss the discourtesy of going silent after structural movement." Grant looked down at Everett, who had managed to sit upright beside the rock shelf. "Understood. You sound amused." "I am not." "You are?" Grant descended on the line. His boots touched snow a minute later. Patch nearly pulled the tether loose before Grant reached him. Grant unclipped it, and the young shepherd ran straight to Everett. Patch hit the old man's chest with all the strength he had left. Everett caught him with both arms. For a moment, the ranger bent over the dog and pressed his face into the wet black and tan fur. "I told you to stay in the shelter," he whispered. Patch licked snow from his mustache. Then the dog turned, hurried back to the olive duty bag, and placed one paw on the strap. Everett watched him. Grant stood nearby, shoulder aching, breath white in the fading light. "He's been doing that all day," Grant said. Everett's expression changed in a way Grant could not name. "Good." Grant looked from the dog to the bag, then back to Everett. "Why is that good?" Everett did not answer. Above them, Pine Watch Station creaked in the wind, emptier now than it had been a minute before. The rescue team could not reach them before dark. Dana made that clear without making it sound like failure. "Southwest cabin is your best hold point," she said over the radio. "Less than half a mile from your current location, stocked for winter closures. Wood stove, dry layers, emergency water, basic medical kit. Grant, you'll keep Everett moving but not rushing. Watch coordination and speech." Everett was sitting against the rock shelf with Patch pressed half across his lap, as if the young shepherd had decided warmth could be shared by force. Grant looked toward the trees beyond Pine Watch. The station groaned behind them in the wind, emptied now of its last person, but not yet safe enough to ignore. Snow had begun moving sideways again, fine and dry, drawn through the clearing in pale lines. Grant keyed his mic. "Copy. Moving to cabin." Everett tried to stand before Grant reached him. He made it halfway. His knees disagreed. Grant caught him under one arm. "I was testing the ground," Everett said. "The ground failed your test." "The ground has always been opinionated." Patch circled Everett's boots, staying close enough that Grant nearly tripped twice. The olive duty bag hung from Grant's left shoulder. The metal box rode inside the outer line pack, awkward and heavier than its size suggested. Grant did not ask again what was in it. Some questions were better asked beside a fire than under a collapsing roof. They moved slowly through the trees. Everett's weight shifted unevenly, favoring his left side. Grant kept his pace short. Patch trotted close, then fell behind, then hurried forward again, as if refusing to choose between the man who had first fed him and the man now carrying the bag. The cabin appeared at the edge of a small clearing, low and square beneath a steep roof. It looked less like rescue than permission to stop. Grant got the door open with one shoulder. The room inside smelled of old pine, cold ashes, dry wool, and closed-up air. A cast-iron stove stood against one wall. Split wood waited in a metal rack. Plastic bins labeled in black marker held blankets, socks, thermal shirts, ration packs, and a medical kit. "Dana," Grant said. "We're inside." Status: Everett ambulatory with assistance, shivering, alert but tired. Patch inside, starting heat. "Good. Warm him gradually. No hot shower, no direct heat to extremities." Everett lowered himself onto a wooden chair with more care than dignity. "I know how cold works," Dana answered before Grant could. "Then you'll appreciate being monitored by someone who does too." Everett looked at the radio. "I dislike her." Grant opened the stove. "No, you don't." "No, but I was hoping to." The fire took on the third match. Grant had always liked that part of winter, the first small commitment of flame, how a cold room did not change all at once but began making promises. He kept the stove door cracked until the wood caught properly, then moved Everett away from the direct heat and wrapped him in 2 blankets. He found dry layers in the supply bin. "Can you change without falling over?" Everett gave him a look. "I have survived 73 years without a deputy supervising my sleeves. Today has been special." Everett allowed assistance after that, though he complained through every step. Patch watched the procedure with great suspicion from beside the duty bag. His head rested on the canvas. One paw lay over the strap. Every time Grant moved near the bag, Patch opened one eye. "I'm not taking it," Grant said. Patch did not believe in verbal contracts. By the time the fire began to warm the room, evening had darkened the windows to blue. Wind pushed against the cabin roof, but the sound had softened. It no longer felt like the mountain was trying to get in, more like it wanted to be acknowledged. Everett sat near the stove wearing a cream thermal shirt and a brown-green cardigan from the emergency supplies, both too large for his narrow frame. His burgundy cap rested on the table. Without it, his white hair looked thinner, less ranger, more old man. Grant did not look too long. Everett noticed anyway. "If you say I look tired, I'll assume your training has failed." "You look argumentative." "Better." Grant handed him warm, sweetened water. Everett took it with both hands. Pat shifted closer to the stove, but kept one paw on the bag. Grant sat across from Everett on the opposite chair. His shoulder ached from the impact against the station. His knee had stiffened. The radio charged on a small emergency power unit near the counter. For the first time all day, no one was moving. That made the silence more difficult. Grant nodded toward the olive bag. "You said names." Everett stared at the canvas. For a while, Grant thought he would refuse. Then Everett leaned forward, reached for the zipper, and opened the duty bag. There were no weapons inside, no cash, no hidden crime, nothing that explained the fear of losing it to anyone looking for a secret. The bag held folded burial flags sealed in waterproof sleeves, old photographs, copies of military identification cards, transfer forms, handwritten letters, and a thick working ledger bound in faded blue cloth. Every item had been packed carefully, not obsessively, reverently. Everett lifted a photograph first. A young man in uniform stood beside an aging pickup, grinning as if the person behind the camera had just insulted him. "Harold Jensen," Everett said. "Fixed radios after he came home. Half the county brought him broken ones. Widows never paid, though he complained about their timing." He placed the photograph on the table, away from the stove. Another sleeve held a picture of a broad-faced woman in an army jacket, laughing beside a rusted station wagon. Marion Bell, not related to Dana, worked 32 years at a grocery store, remembered every customer's birthday and forgot her own twice. Grant looked at the forms, dates, names, branches, source notes, transfer signatures. It was not sentimental on paper. That made it harder to dismiss. Everett turned a page in the ledger. 17 years ago, a funeral director called the Veterans Chapter about a flag nobody had claimed. Man had outlived his wife, his brother, and nearly everyone who remembered him before he was old. We found a distant cousin 2 states away. Did he take it? No. Everett's mouth moved as if the memory still puzzled him. He said he didn't know the man well enough to keep the flag. Then he said, "Just make sure somebody remembers him." Patch exhaled in his sleep. The cabin seemed to grow smaller around the sentence. "So you did," Grant said. Everett nodded. "I carried his name to a lower trail on private land, read it aloud, put a small stone beside the path. Nothing formal, no speeches, just a name and one true thing." "One true thing?" "Rank and dates are useful. They are not a person." Everett touched the ledger. Harold fixed radios. Marion forgot her birthday. Louis Arnett hated carrots and grew them every year because his wife liked them. Grant looked at him. "You put that on a memorial?" Everett's eyes sharpened. "Do you object?" "No." "Good. Hero is a word people use when they've run out of details." Grant had no answer to that. Everett continued. 1 stone became 4, then 11. Families heard, funeral homes called, some donated copies, some original letters or photographs they could no longer store but could not throw away. Nothing entered the bag without a name, source, and date. But not everything is complete? Everett looked toward the window. Outside, Snow whispered against the glass. No. That single word carried the real weight of the bag. Everett explained that the memorial trail had started on private land owned by the family of a deceased veteran. The family had given written permission years earlier. The owner died the previous spring. The heirs sold the parcel to the county as part of a fire management corridor. The county did not want to erase the memorial. Everett said that before Grant could ask. They gave us until spring. To do what? Verify identities, confirm provenance for original materials, create a maintenance plan, move the trail if the slope is considered unsafe, provide safe public access. Grant leaned back. That sounds reasonable. Everett's face tightened. Reasonable things can still break your heart. Grant said nothing. There are 43 stones. Some files are clean, some are partial, some are scraps, old addresses, nicknames, stories told to me by people who are dead now too. And you thought you could fix all of that alone? Everett's eyes came back to him. I began it. That isn't the same thing. No, Everett said. It is worse. Beginning something makes people believe you know how to finish it. Grant looked at the open bag. The folded flags, sleeves, and ledger no longer seemed like objects. They seemed like hands reaching from different years, each holding one corner of the same weight. No one person can carry 43 lives, Grant said. Everett's expression closed. There it is. What? The comfortable sentence. Grant frowned. People say that when they want weight divided until no one feels responsible. That's not what I meant. It is where the sentence goes. Grant felt irritation rise. Not anger exactly. Recognition maybe. Everett's stubbornness had begun to resemble something Grant knew too well. A locked door pretending to be a wall. You nearly froze inside a tower, Grant said. With records a whole chapter should be protecting together. I went to winterize Pine Watch. With the bag. I was taking it to the archive after. In a storm. The storm arrived early. You still went alone. Everett set the cup down slowly. And you work every January 18th, so no one can ask you about Nolan Avery. The room went still. Even Patch lifted his head. Grant did not move. The name entered the cabin and changed the pressure in it. You don't know anything about that, Grant said. No, Everett answered. I know you're a man who chose a mountain road on a date that did not look accidental. People escaping something often pick places where nobody can ask questions. Grant looked away first. That bothered him more than it should have. The fire settled with a soft crack. Everett did not press. Some silences were traps. This one felt more like space. Patch rose stiffly, left the duty bag, and crossed the few feet to Grant's chair. The young shepherd pressed his shoulder against Grant's shin, then rested his head on Grant's knee. Grant stared down at him. Patch did not know Nolan's name. He did not know anniversaries, unanswered phones, or the way one ordinary decision could harden in a man until it felt like law. The dog only knew breathing. Grant's had changed. Nolan Avery was my partner, Grant said. His own voice sounded unfamiliar. Everett waited. Army National Guard before the department, patrol after. We worked together long enough that people stopped asking which one of us they were talking to. He was loud, bad with maps, good with people, irritating in most public settings. Everett nodded. Useful traits, badly arranged. Grant almost smiled. Almost. He called me the night he died. The fire made another small sound. I saw the phone light up. I'd been on shift too long. I was tired. I thought I'd call him back in the morning. Patch pushed his head harder against Grant's knee. He died before morning. Aneurysm. Sudden. The doctor said there was nothing anyone could have done. And you believe the doctor? Yes. Everett watched him. Grant swallowed. "I know answering would not have saved him." "Then what are you punishing yourself for?" Grant looked at the trout keychain lying beside his folded gloves on the table. He had taken the keys from his pocket when he sat down, without thinking. The brass fish caught the firelight in its worn curves. For not being there. That was the truth stripped down until it no longer had room to hide. Grant did not say more. Everett did not tell him it was not his fault. He did not say Nolan would understand. He did not reach for some tidy line people used when they wanted grief to become less inconvenient. Instead, he said, "You've been paying a debt nobody asked you to owe." Grant closed his hand over Patch's neck. The dog's fur was still damp beneath the top layer. Everett looked at the open duty bag, then at the long metal box resting near his chair. "My brother's name was Arthur." Grant waited. Everett pulled the box closer. It was dented at one corner and wrapped in a waterproof sleeve. His hands had steadied since the fire warmed him, but they changed when he touched the clasp. Not shaking from cold now. Something older. He opened the covering. Inside lay a folded burial flag protected by blue cloth. Beneath it rested an envelope yellowed at the edges. Across the front, in faded handwriting, were two words, Everett Langford. "My brother served too," Everett said. "Different unit. Different war inside the same house, eventually." Grant looked from the flag to the envelope. Everett and Arthur had returned to Wyoming within 2 years of each other to help care for their father. Their father's health declined slowly enough to wear everyone down, and quickly enough that no one could adjust. Everett believed Arthur avoided the hardest work. Arthur believed Everett used responsibility as a weapon. One argument over medication schedules became a trial of everything they had resented for years. Arthur left. Their father died. At the funeral, the brothers spoke politely, and not at all. "Nearly 40 years, Everett said. When did Arthur die?" 8 years ago. Grant looked at the unopened envelope. "And you've carried that since then?" Everett nodded. "A state attorney found it. Sent it with the flag." "You never opened it?" "No." "But you read everyone else's names." Everett looked at the duty bag. "Yes." The contradiction sat between them, exact and merciless. Patch left Grant's knee and returned to the canvas bag. He lay down beside it, chin on the strap, as if the room had become too honest and someone needed to hold the old thing in place. Grant looked at Everett. "You're not afraid the letter blames you?" The old ranger's eyes shifted. Grant said quietly, "You're afraid it doesn't." Everett did not answer at first. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its dry humor. "If he forgave me, then I wasted 40 years for nothing. If he didn't, then at least I had a reason." Neither possibility sounded like mercy. The fire burned steadily. Outside, the wind moved through the pines and carried snow against the cabin in soft, patient touches. Everett closed the metal box, not because the conversation was finished, but because opening the letter had become a different kind of rescue, and neither man was ready to climb again. Grant looked at the duty bag, the ledger, the flags, the sleeping dog with one paw on the strap. Everett Langford had spent years making sure strangers were not reduced to silence. And all that time, the name closest to him had remained sealed in a box. Morning came without urgency. No alarm, no sudden call over the radio, no hard knock of wind against the cabin walls. Pale sunlight entered through the frost-lined window and stretched across the wooden floor in thin gold bars. Outside, the storm had moved east, leaving the forest polished and almost too bright to look at directly. Grant woke in the chair beside the stove, with his neck stiff and his left knee reminding him of every step he had taken the day before. Patch slept near his boots. The young shepherd had one paw on the olive duty bag, but not with the desperate pressure of the night before. His body had relaxed enough that his folded left ear lay sideways against the canvas. Every few breaths his paws twitched as if he were still climbing through snow in his sleep. Everett was already awake. The old ranger sat at the table with the brown-green cardigan pulled tight around his narrow shoulders. His burgundy knit cap rested beside one elbow. The metal box sat closed in front of him. He was looking out the window. "You sleep like a man trying to start a lawnmower?" Everett said. Grant rubbed a hand across his face. "I don't." Patch disagrees. The dog opened one amber eye, decided the discussion lacked food, and closed it again. Grant stood carefully, testing his knee before placing full weight on it. The stove had burned down to red coals. He added a piece of wood and checked the emergency radio. Dana Whitmore came on shortly after sunrise. "Cabin team, report," Grant answered, while Everett drank from an enamel cup with both hands. "Inside cabin, Everett alert, walking with assistance. Patch stable, weather clear at our location." "Good. Rescue team cleared the southwest approach. Snowmobiles can reach the old Memorial Junction within 90 minutes. Upper route to Pine Watch remains unsafe. Do not return to the station." Everett leaned toward the radio. "I had not planned to return to the building that tried to throw me off itself." Dana ignored the complaint. "Everett limits exertion, short distance only, warm layers, monitor coordination." "I'm standing within hearing range," Everett said. "That has not historically improved compliance." Grant looked at the map posted on the cabin wall. A faded blue line marked the lower route toward the pickup point. A smaller handwritten mark showed the Memorial Trail branching from the junction. Everett saw where Grant's eyes landed. "No?" Grant did not answer immediately. "We haven't discussed anything yet." "We are not discussing it. The memorial is close to the pickup route. It is under snow. So is Wyoming." Everett set the cup down. "The rescue team is coming. My hip hurts. I am wearing government-issued socks of suspicious age. There is no reason to take a detour." Every reason sounded practical. That was what made them dangerous. Grant had learned that avoidance rarely arrived wearing fear. It dressed itself as timing, weather, fatigue, professional courtesy, and the promise of later. He had used all of them. For 6 years, he had told himself Nolan's family deserved privacy. He had told himself the drive was too long after work. He had told himself the first anniversary was too raw, the second was awkward, the third would only reopen things, the fourth had become too late, the fifth would require explaining the first 4. By the 6th, avoidance had become a tradition. Grant folded the map. "We take the safe route," he said. Everett relaxed slightly. "And when we reach the junction, you decide whether 300 yards is too far." "I have decided." "No," Grant said. "You've prepared an argument." Everett looked at him with open dislike. Patch rose, stretched with his rear end high and his front paws sliding on the floor, then shook himself hard enough to make his left ear flap once before folding forward again. The movement loosened something in the room. Everett looked away first. They ate oatmeal from the cabin supplies and packed slowly. Grant returned the photographs, forms, letters, and working ledger to their waterproof sleeves, each one going into the duty bag with more care than he had expected to feel. The documents no longer looked like paperwork. They looked like small pieces of people who had nearly slipped past the edge of the world without sound. Everett watched him close the zipper. The metal box went last, wrapped again in its waterproof cover. He did not touch it. Outside, the brightness made all 3 of them stop at the doorway. The world after the storm looked newly made. Snow sat high on every branch. Ice crystals sparked across the open patches between trees. Their breath appeared and vanished in slow, white clouds. Grant carried most of the gear. Everett used an ashwood walking stick from the cabin wall, his movements steadier than the night before, but still careful. Patch wore the simple rescue harness and stayed on a short lead attached to Grant's belt. The lower trail sloped gently through the trees. Blue markers guided the route toward the pickup point. The snow was deep but lighter than the drifted powder near Pine Watch. Still, Everett had to pause often. Each time he pretended to be studying the scenery. Grant let him. There were kinds of pride that did not need to be corrected out loud. After 20 minutes, they reached the fork. The blue markers continued downhill. A narrower path curved left between the pines. It was barely visible now, marked only by a weathered wooden post half buried in snow. Everett stopped. Patch lowered his nose. He sniffed the air, then the broken edge of the old path. He moved left several feet and pulled gently against the lead. Grant did not say the dog knew where the memorial was. Patch knew scent. He knew Everett's old tracks, perhaps, or the mixture of wool, canvas, metal, and habit that had passed through that place many times before the storm covered it. The dog pulled again. Everett stared at the narrow trail. "He followed my snowmobile scent yesterday," he said. "Maybe." "He doesn't know what's down there." "No?" Patch looked back at them. Everett gave a quiet laugh with no humor in it. "Useful animal?" Grant asked. "How?" Everett shifted his grip on the walking stick. "Doesn't know enough to make excuses." Then he stepped onto the memorial trail. Grant followed. The path descended through widely spaced pines. Sunlight reached the ground in bright patches, and the air felt different there, less exposed to wind. The snow lay smoother, softer, as if the trail had spent the storm protected by the trees. The first stone appeared near the base of a pine. Only its upper edge showed. Everett stopped and brushed snow away with one gloved hand. A name emerged. Harold Jensen. Beneath it, in smaller letters. Fixed what others threw away. Everett's mouth softened. Radios, mostly. Toasters, too, though he said they were beneath his professional dignity. They moved on. Grant let Everett set the pace. Another stone stood several yards farther, tilted slightly from years of freezing ground. Everett cleared it with more care than speed. Louis Arnett. The line beneath the name read, "Grew carrots for the woman he loved." He despised carrots, Everett said. Planted enough every year to supply an elementary school. His wife liked them. That was his entire explanation. Patch sniffed the stone, then sneezed softly and moved on. The memorial was not grand. There was no flagpole, no arch, no bronze statue, no polished wall designed to make grief feel official. The stones were modest, placed along the curve of the trail where weather could touch them. Some inscriptions had faded. Some leaned a little. Pine needles and snow gathered around their bases. Yet the place did not feel abandoned. It felt paused, as if the people named there had been waiting without complaint for someone to uncover them again. Everett brushed snow from stone after stone. Marion Bell, a mechanic who sang opera badly, a nurse who carried peppermints for frightened patients, a truck driver who mailed birthday cards to his sister for 48 straight years. Everett's story stayed small. That was their strength. Grant began to understand why the old ranger resisted paperwork that reduced the people to service dates and verification fields. The ordinary details were not decorations. They were proof that the names had belonged to full lives, not just clean records. Near the end of the path, the trees opened into a small clearing. 42 stones formed a loose curve around the edge. One space remained empty. Everett stood before it and did not move. Patch sat beside the duty bag, looking first at Everett and then at Grant. Grant lowered the pack. Everett took out the metal box. His hands were steady as he unwrapped it. They began to shake only when he reached the envelope. The folded burial flag remained protected in its blue cloth. Everett placed it on a dry blanket Grant spread over the snow. The envelope looked fragile in the bright light. Everett held it for almost a minute. "I can open it at home," he said. Grant stood beside him. "You can." "I could ask Margaret what it says. She handled the estate. She may have read a copy." "You can." Everett turned sharply. "You are not helping." Grant kept his voice low. "You're not asking for help. You're asking for permission to leave." The words hung between them, not cruel, not gentle either. Everett looked down at the envelope again. Snow fell from a high branch somewhere behind them with a soft thump. The old ranger closed his eyes. Then he opened the letter. The paper inside had 3 pages. The handwriting leaned hard to the right, some lines crossed out and restarted in the margins. Everett read silently at first. His face changed slowly, then all at once, then not at all. Defense, anger, recognition, something like relief that did not know where to land. At last he began reading pieces aloud. Arthur had written that he still believed Everett judged him unfairly during their father's illness. He wrote that Everett could make care feel like a courtroom, every task another exhibit, proving who loved harder and who failed first. Everett stopped. "That sounds like him," he said. His voice was rough, but there was almost a smile in it. Arthur admitted he had avoided responsibility. He wrote that leaving had been easier than staying in a house where every conversation became a contest. He also wrote that silence had become its own lie. Both brothers had said things meant to wound, then spent decades behaving as if not speaking made them principled. Everett read more quietly when the letter turned toward childhood. Arthur remembered the room they had shared as boys. In winter, ice formed inside the window glass. Their old dog, Button, slept between their beds because neither brother wanted to admit he was afraid of the dark. They took turns feeding her, though each accused the other of doing it wrong. Before they had become men who needed to win, Arthur wrote, they had once loved each other without keeping score. Everett lowered the letter. Only one section remained. He read it in a voice that barely held. "If you're still angry, be angry. Just don't pretend we were never brothers." The forest stayed bright and indifferent around them. Everett bowed his head. His tears did not come loudly. They slipped into his white mustache and fell onto the edge of his glove. He turned slightly away, as if some old part of him still believed dignity could be rescued from this moment. Then he seemed to remember there was no one left to perform for. "I was still angry," he said. Grant stood beside him. So was he. I wanted him to admit I was right. He admitted part of it. Not enough. No. Everett let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it had not broken halfway through. He always stopped one sentence too early. A clump of snow dropped from the branch above Patch and landed squarely across the dog's muzzle. Patch jerked back and sneezed so violently that his front paws slipped. For 1 second, grief held its shape. Then Everett laughed. Not because the letter hurt less, because Patch looked offended by the sky. Grant laughed too. Patch sneezed again and shook snow over both men, scattering flakes across the blanket, the metal box, and Everett's boots. The moment did not become less sacred. It became human. Everett folded the letter along its original creases and returned it to the envelope. From the metal box, he removed a small engraved stone wrapped in cloth. Grant saw the name before Everett set it down. Arthur Langford beneath it. Brother, soldier, terrible harmonica player. Grant glanced at him. Terrible? Catastrophic. You engraved that before reading the letter? I never doubted the harmonica. Together they cleared the empty space. Everett placed Arthur's marker into the snow-softened ground. He set the folded flag beside it for several quiet minutes before returning it to its protective cloth. There was no speech, no salute, no attempt to make 40 years clean. Everett simply said his brother's name aloud. Arthur Langford. The name moved into the trees and disappeared without vanishing. Grant opened the duty bag to secure the metal box again. Inside, a smooth blank stone rested in a canvas pouch. Everett must have packed it as a spare marker. Grant lifted it before thinking. It sat cold and heavy in his hands. A name came to him with such force that for a moment he could see it already carved. Nolan Avery. He imagined the letters. He imagined Claire Avery's face. He imagined having to say out loud that he had seen the call and done nothing until morning had become too late. His fingers did not move toward the small engraving tool in the pouch. Everett did not ask him to try. That kindness was almost worse. Grant carried the blank stone to the space beside Arthur's marker and set it down in the snow without a name. It looked unfinished. That was honest. Patch sniffed the blank stone, then sat between it and Arthur's. In the distance, snowmobile engines rose through the trees, faint at first, then clearer. The rescue team was coming. Everett stood with one hand on his walking stick, the other holding the opened letter against his chest. Grant looked at the nameless stone one last time. He was not ready. But for the first time in 6 years, not ready did not sound the same as never. Everett Langford spent one night at the county hospital and complained through most of it. The doctors called it mild hypothermia, which sounded harmless until a nurse explained that mild meant his body had begun losing the argument with the cold, but hadn't lost badly enough to do lasting damage. Everett objected to the word mild after that. He also objected to the hospital gown, the blood pressure cuff, the plastic cup of broth, and the rule requiring him to call for assistance before standing. When Grant visited the next morning, Everett sat upright in bed, wearing reading glasses and correcting the discharge summary with a pen he had apparently taken from a nurse. "They wrote retired park ranger," Everett said. "You are a retired park ranger." "I was also an Army communications specialist." "The hospital is treating your temperature, not writing your biography." That attitude is how history deteriorates. Grant looked at the corrected paper. Everett had added 2 commas and underlined communications. "You feeling better?" "I am feeling supervised." "That's close." Everett handed the paper back to the nurse with the expression of a man returning poorly maintained equipment. Across town, Patch received a quieter but less dignified examination. Brooke Fenner, the county animal control officer, scanned the young shepherd twice for a microchip and found nothing. Brooke was compact, dark-haired, and practical in the way of someone who had heard every version of "I'm only keeping him for a few days." She wore a khaki field shirt under a navy vest, and an orange leash hung from one pocket, like a warning. Patch stood on the clinic table with his legs trembling, but his head high. "He's underweight," the veterinarian said. "Dehydrated, pads cracked, stomach irritated from inconsistent food. No breaks, no frostbite. Heart and lungs sound strong." Brooke checked the intake form. "He's been surviving on stubbornness?" Grant stood beside the table, one hand near Patch's shoulder, but not touching unless the dog leaned into him first. "That seems accurate." Brooke looked over the top of her clipboard. "You understand found dog procedure, Sergeant?" "Yes." "Good. Then I'll say it anyway, because people become legally forgetful when dogs look at them like that." Patch looked at Grant. Brooke continued. "We post the notice, check surrounding shelters and reports. Statutory hold runs. Until then, you can apply to foster. Foster means temporary." "I understand the definition." Patch lowered his head against Grant's wrist. Brooke stared at him. "He doesn't." 3 days later, Patch entered Grant's house wearing a rust-orange nylon collar, carrying a bag of prescription food, and treating every doorway as if it might lead back into the storm. Grant's house sat on the edge of town, a modest place with a clean driveway, an over-organized garage, and too many quiet rooms. He placed a padded dog bed beside the living room fireplace. Patch ignored it, The young shepherd paced the hardwood floor, nails clicking, nose working hard. He smelled the couch, the baseboards, the kitchen table, the old patrol boots near the door. Twice his feet slipped out from under him. The second time he bumped a chair and retreated beneath the table. Grant sat on the floor several feet away. He did not reach for him. He had learned that fear did not always want comfort immediately. Sometimes it wanted distance without abandonment. After a while, Grant brought the olive duty bag from the mudroom and placed it beside the dog bed. Patch came out within a minute. He circled the bag, sniffed each seam, then lay down with his chest pressed against the canvas. The original documents were no longer inside. Everett had taken them home, then locked them in the Veterans Chapter's safe. The bag Grant kept temporarily held only empty waterproof sleeves and the smell of snow, shelter, Everett, and whatever Patch believed safety meant. It was enough. That first week, Patch would not sleep unless one paw touched the bag. By the second week, he slept if the bag was in the room. By the third, he woke Grant before dawn by pressing a cold nose under his jaw with the solemn confidence of a dog who had discovered law enforcement's weakest point. Grant came awake so fast he nearly fell out of bed. Patch stepped back, pleased. "You're becoming hard to defend," Grant told him. Patch wagged once. At work, Grant was less easy to defend. The incident review took place in a conference room at the sheriff's office, beneath fluorescent lights that made everyone look more tired than they deserved. Captain Laurel Keene sat at the head of the table with a thin file open in front of her. She was 55, compactly built, with a steel-gray pixie cut and dark eyes that rarely needed volume to make a point. Her Navy command uniform looked as if it had never considered wrinkling. Dana Whitmore joined by phone. Owen Rusk sat against the wall, arms crossed, orange rescue whistle still clipped to the strap of his SAR jacket, as if he had come prepared to leave for another mountain. Laurel removed her silver-framed reading glasses. That was never good. "You saved him," she said. Grant waited. "That does not make every decision you made correct." "No, ma'am." "You continued after vehicle access ended." "Yes." "You approached a compromised structure." "Yes." "You performed a rope-based extraction before the ground team arrived." "Yes." Laurel watched him. This is where some deputies begin explaining why rules do not apply to weather, dogs, old men, or personal conviction. Grant looked at the table. "I reported the end of vehicle access. I continued on foot as assessment. Everett's responses slowed, and heat failure was confirmed. I sent structure video. Dana, Owen, and Miles assessed from remote. I set independent lines, load-tested them, and approached only after Owen cleared the system." Owen did not soften his voice. "I didn't clear the building, I cleared the rope system." Grant nodded. "Correct." Laurel looked between them. That was enough. The review did not praise him into recklessness or punish him for the outcome being good. It recorded what had worked, what had been close, and what would not become standard procedure just because it had succeeded once. At the end, Laurel closed the file. "Next time, if there is one, you keep talking." Grant knew she meant the seconds after the awning collapsed. "Yes, ma'am." "And Grant?" He looked up. "You do not get to use competence as a disguise for being alone." The room was quiet. Owen looked at the floor. Dana did not speak through the phone. Grant nodded once. It was not an apology. Not yet. The formal county notice arrived for the memorial 2 weeks later. The Veterans Chapter received it first. Everett called Grant, then tried to make the notice sound less serious than it was. Margot Weller corrected him within 3 minutes of the first meeting. Margot ran the chapter from a long table in a converted office beside the county library. She was broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and so organized she made paper feel nervous. A black leather document case sat beside her chair. A burgundy fountain pen rested precisely on top of a stack of folders. Grant suggested a newspaper story. A rescued ranger, a sheriff's sergeant, a half-frozen dog, and forgotten veterans, he said. People would help. No, Margot said. It was the first word she had spoken to him in person. Everett leaned toward Grant. Margot dislikes newspapers. I dislike emergencies created by applause, Margot said. Sympathy is not documentation. She slid the county notice across the table. The trail could remain temporarily. By spring, the chapter had to submit verified identities, provenance for original artifacts, authorization for display where required, a maintenance agreement, and a safer access plan. Clara Hensley arrived late with a canvas satchel and a portable scanner. She was small, silver-haired, and moved like a person who had no patience for wasted motion. Her round metal glasses sat low on her nose. She looked at the folders with more warmth than she offered anyone in the room. My qualification, Clara said, removing her gloves, is that I know the difference between a memory, a source, and a story someone repeated until it felt like a source. Everett frowned. You and Margot must be delightful together. We are, Clara said, when the records are alphabetized. The work began with forms. Everett hated the forms immediately. Full legal name, service branch, unit, service dates, source of personal item, known relatives, supporting documents. Boxes make lives look small, Everett said. Clara removed her glasses. Grant noticed the gesture. Incorrect information makes lives smaller, she said. The first correction came from a file Everett believed was complete. A man he had always described as an Air Force pilot had been an aircraft mechanic. Everett stared at the service record. He told everyone he flew. He may have worked on flight crews, Clara said, or he may have preferred that version. But he repaired aircraft through 2 deployments. That is not a lesser life. Everett closed the folder. The next correction hurt differently. A stone said one veteran had died alone. Clara found an obituary naming a cousin in Idaho who had attended the burial and never known the memorial existed. Then there was Red Mallory. No legal record matched the name. For 2 days, Margot searched old notes, chapter minutes, funeral home records, and regional service listings. Eventually, she found the man's legal name, Thomas Allen Mercer. Red had been a nickname, misspelled once, and copied faithfully after that. Everett spoke less after that. One afternoon, he stood abruptly and reached for his walking stick. I should step away. Margot looked up. From the table? From the project? No one reassured him. That was worse, Grant thought, but maybe kinder. Everett stared at the shelves instead of the people. If the stories are wrong, someone more qualified should finish them. Grant closed the folder in front of him. You remembered enough to keep looking. That is not the same as remembering correctly. No? Everett turned toward him. This is not helping. You want it to be betrayal because betrayal would give you permission to quit. The room stilled. Grant kept his voice level. You were wrong about a job title, wrong about a cousin. You were handed a nickname and treated it as a name. That doesn't erase those people. Everett's jaw tightened. It doesn't make it right. No, Grant said. Correcting it does. Clara looked at him as if he had finally said something useful. Everett lowered himself back into the chair. The shift did not happen dramatically. It came 2 days later through a phone call. Clara located the cousin in Idaho. His name was Martin Cole, and he was 71. When Clara explained the memorial, the line went quiet for so long, Grant thought the call had dropped. Then Martin said, Did Everett tell you about the harmonica? Everett frowned. Martin laughed through the speaker. Arthur's old friend had carried a harmonica for 30 years and knew one song, which he played badly at every family gathering and never once noticed people leaving the room. Everett wrote it down, not because it sounded impressive, because it was true. After that, people began arriving. A widow brought letters tied with faded blue ribbon. A retired mechanic carried a unit photograph wrapped in a kitchen towel. A diner owner remembered a veteran who ordered biscuits and black coffee every morning, then left half the biscuits for birds behind the building. Clara scanned. Margot verified. Miles Farrow brought rolled plans for a new lower trail that avoided the unstable slope. He arrived in a navy work jacket with a carpenter pencil behind one ear and gilt still tucked somewhere behind his ribs. Designing the safer path became his way of saying what he did not know how to say to Everett. Owen and the SR team assessed winter access. Grant transported boxes, repaired shelving, carried coffee, and learned that historical preservation required more extension cords than search warrants. Patch attended most sessions. At first, he lay directly under the table with his paw touching the empty duty bag. Later, he wandered. He leaned against people who stopped speaking mid-sentence. He sat beside Franklin Shaw, an elderly veteran whose fingers shook around a paper cup while he tried to describe a friend who had carried peppermints to hospital waiting rooms because fear always made people's mouths dry. Patch did not understand service records. He understood tension. He understood the moment before a person left the room to avoid saying a name. One evening, he stole a butter cookie from Margot's open document case. Margot stared at the empty wrapper. Everett said, "Tactical strike against organized sorrow." "It was theft," Margot replied. "Most tactical strikes are." The room laughed, even Margot, though she denied it immediately. By the end of winter, the project no longer fit inside Everett's blue ledger. There were spreadsheets, audio recordings, scanned photographs, signed releases, corrected inscriptions, construction notes, volunteer schedules, and boxes labeled in Clara's narrow handwriting. The 43 names were still heavy. But they were no longer balanced on one old man's back. One night, Grant arrived late and found Everett alone at the chapter table. The olive duty bag hung from the back of a chair. Patch slept beneath it, not touching the canvas now, only near it. Everett looked around the room. "I thought asking for help meant admitting I couldn't carry it." Grant set down 2 coffees. "You couldn't." Everett gave him an offended look. "You remain poor at comfort." "I brought coffee." Everett accepted the cup. Outside, snow drifted softly past the office windows. Grant sat across from him. "Neither could I." Everett did not answer. He did not need to. In the quiet room, 43 names waited inside organized folders, protected not by one man's guilt, but by many hands finally holding the same weight. 1 year after Grant Halvorsen found Patch in the snow, the memorial trail opened again. It did not stand where Everett had first placed the stones. The old trail on the unstable slope had been closed and marked for restoration. Lower on the mountain, where the land held firm through freeze and thaw, a new path curved through a gentler stand of pines. Miles Farrow had designed it with the same practical care he brought to bridges, railings, and stubborn old buildings. The walkway was wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. Low timber rails followed the sharper bends. Resting benches stood where the trees opened toward the valley. Miles claimed the view had decided the bench locations. Margot Weller claimed the building code had. Both were correct, though neither liked saying so. Near the trailhead stood a small timber cabin with broad windows and a stone chimney. It had once been a storage shed. Volunteers had rebuilt it into a visitor's room, modest and warm, with enough space for framed copies of photographs, letters, service records, and typed stories gathered over the past year. The original documents were kept at the County Historical Library under Clara Hensley's protection. Clara had made that rule before anyone asked. "Paper is not sentimental," she had told Everett. "Paper is fragile." Everett had answered, "So are people, and you let them visit." The people do not belong in acid-free folders. That had ended the debate, mostly because Everett had no answer and disliked admitting it. The old olive duty bag hung in a glass display on the central wall of the visitor's cabin. It had been cleaned but not restored. Scratches still crossed the faded canvas. One metal clasp remained dark with age. Along the lower seam, a faint stain marked where snow had soaked into it on the day Patch had lain across it at the roadside. Margot had resisted displaying it. "It is not an archival container," she said. Everett had replied, "Neither am I, and you keep putting me in front of visitors." Clara solved the dispute by placing the bag in a shallow display case that could be opened during supervised programs. Beneath it, a plain wooden sign read, "No one here is only a name." Patch spent most mornings lying beneath that display, though Grant suspected loyalty had less to do with it than the stove in the corner. A year had changed him almost beyond recognition. The young shepherd, whose ribs had once shown beneath wet fur, had grown into a broad-chested German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat. His black saddle ran clean across his back, and the uneven dark mask around his right eye remained as distinct as a thumbprint. Both ears now stood upright, though the left one still tilted when he was tired, making even his most serious expressions look slightly unconvinced. He wore a dark brown leather collar with a brass tag. Patch Halvorsen. Everett still pointed at him and told visitors, "That animal once weighed less than the bag." No one believed him? Patch accepted the disbelief with the solemn dignity of a public official. The reopening ceremony had been scheduled for January 18th. Not by accident. The county permit became active that week. Margot preferred the first clear winter weekend. Clara wanted the date tied to the archive approval. Everett suggested spring because he claimed people made poor decisions when cold. Claire Avery was the one who noticed January 18th fell on a Saturday. She sent Grant a message with one question. Would that feel wrong? Grant stared at the screen for almost half an hour. Patch sat beside his chair, resting his chin on Grant's knee. Grant had not told Claire everything yet, not in full. He had answered her messages, accepted 2 invitations to dinner, and looked through Nolan's old photographs with her once in her kitchen. But he had still kept the worst sentence inside himself. He typed 3 responses and deleted all of them. Finally, he wrote, "No, let the day hold something else too." The morning of the ceremony arrived clear and cold. Fresh snow covered the valley, but the new trail had been cleared before sunrise. Dana Whitmore had approved the weather plan, emergency route, and heated shelter locations with the fierce calm of a woman prepared to argue with the mountain if necessary. She stationed 2 volunteers near the steepest bend. Everett objected. "People have walked downhill for centuries without supervision." Dana adjusted the yellow marker in her vest pocket. "And some of them fell." Everett considered this unnecessarily negative. By 10 o'clock, families and veterans began arriving. Some carried framed photographs wrapped in scarves. Others brought folded papers in coat pockets. A few brought nothing except names they had not spoken in years. Walter's old jokes had become Everett's new role. He stood near the entrance in his clean forest green ranger coat, white hair showing beneath his burgundy cap, one hand resting on his ashwood walking stick. He no longer carried the records alone. His task was to guide people from stone to stone and tell the stories Clara had already verified. He still occasionally changed a date. Clara, standing nearby in a midnight blue wool coat with her round metal glasses and dark wooden hair clip, corrected him without raising her voice. Everett would pause and say, "The official version has interrupted." Clara would answer, "The accurate version has arrived." Margot managed the check-in table with her black leather document case, burgundy fountain pen, and the expression of a woman defending civilization from loose paperwork. Miles inspected every rail twice, though the final safety review had ended 3 days earlier. Grant watched from the cabin porch. He wore a dark navy wool overcoat over a muted steel blue shirt, charcoal trousers, and winter boots cleaned more carefully than usual. In his pocket, his thumb moved over the worn brass trout keychain Nolan had given him years before. Patch sat beside his left leg. Grant had brought the blank stone. For a year it had stayed on the shelf above his fireplace. Sometimes Patch slept below it. Sometimes Grant took it down, set it on the kitchen table, and imagined the first letter. N. Then he would put it back. Not because he had forgotten Nolan, because engraving the name made the loss feel less like weather and more like geography. Something fixed, something that would remain after he walked away. Claire arrived with 2 members of Nolan's family. She was 56, tall and composed, with dark blonde hair streaked silver at the temples. Nolan's blue-gray eyes looked out from her face, direct and difficult to avoid. She wore a camel-wool coat and carried an old film camera against her chest. Grant recognized it immediately. Nolan had taken that camera everywhere and rarely remembered to load it correctly. Claire did not cross straight to Grant. She greeted Everett first, spoke with Margot, and let the morning unfold without making Grant's presence the center of it. He appreciated that. It also made walking to her entirely his responsibility. The ceremony began without a stage. There was no podium, no amplified music, no forced grandeur. People gathered in a loose circle beside the first stones while snow shifted softly from the branches overhead. Everett welcomed them and did not speak about sacrifice in grand terms. He spoke about the danger of reducing people to the worst or most impressive day of their lives. Then families read short entries from the new archive. A mechanic's daughter remembered her father teaching everyone to change a tire, whether they wanted the lesson or not. A widow described a man who pretended to hate dancing but knew every step when nobody was watching. Franklin Shaw told the story of a friend who carried peppermints into every waiting room because fear always made people's mouths dry. The names did not sound distant. They sounded inconvenient, funny, stubborn, and alive. When Everett invited Grant forward, the circle opened. Patch rose with him. Grant carried the blank stone to an open place beside Arthur Langford's marker. Arthur's inscription had weathered its first year without fading. Brother, soldier, terrible harmonica player. Everett stood near it, his gloved hand tight on the walking stick. Nolan's military record had already been verified. His service in the Army National Guard, his years as a patrol officer, the approval from the Memorial Committee, all of it had been handled before this morning. Only the final line had been left for Grant. Miles had prepared a small workstand and engraving tool. Grant could have completed the lettering earlier. He had chosen not to. He wanted the act to happen here. His first line was uneven. The second steadied. Slowly the name appeared. Nolan Avery. Grant did not add rank. He did not add dates. Under the name, he carved one sentence, stopped for every stray dog. Claire laughed softly. Not because it was funny exactly, because it was true, before it was sad. Grant looked at the faces around him. He had prepared several sentences at home. They had sounded sincere in his kitchen. Now they felt borrowed. He let them go. Nolan sang every song wrong, he said. Claire lowered her head with the beginning of a smile. He didn't misremember 1 or 2 words. He seemed to believe lyrics were recommendations. A few people laughed. Grant breathed. He made coffee strong enough to remove paint. He once drove 20 miles in the wrong direction because he refused to admit I was reading the map correctly. Several veterans murmured in recognition. And he stopped for every dog he saw near a road. Grant looked down at Patch. Sometimes the dog belonged to a house 15 feet away. Nolan still stopped. The small laughter faded naturally. Grant reached into his pocket and closed his fingers around the trout keychain. The night before Nolan died, he called me. Claire looked up. Grant kept his eyes on the stone. I saw his name on my phone. I was tired. I told myself I'd call him in the morning. Cold air tightened in his chest. For 6 years, I treated that missed call like a sentence. I thought if I carried enough guilt, it would prove he mattered. I thought refusing every good day afterward was some kind of loyalty. No one interrupted. He called to ask me to go fishing. Grant turned toward Claire. I never told you I saw the call. Claire held his gaze. No, she said. Her voice was quiet. You didn't. The honesty struck harder than comfort would have. I knew you were avoiding us, Claire said. I didn't know what you were punishing yourself for. Grant swallowed. I should have answered. Yes, Claire said. The word moved through the circle. Not cruel. Clean. You should have answered because he loved you and wanted your company. She stepped closer. But he did not call to give you responsibility for the rest of his life. Grant's eyes burned. Claire continued, voice steady though her own eyes had filled. He asked you to go fishing. He did not ask you to save him from something neither of you knew was coming. Grant looked away for 1 second. Then he stopped himself. For years, grief had trained him to turn his face before anyone could witness it. This time, he did not. The tears reached the lines beside his mouth and disappeared into his stubble. He stood there in front of Claire, Everett, Patch, Margot, Clara, Dana, Miles, and the families of 43 other names without pretending the cold had caused them. Claire did not embrace him immediately. Instead, she placed Nolan's old camera in his hands. I found a finished roll inside, she said. Most of the pictures are terrible. Grant let out a breath that almost became a laugh. That sounds right. One is of you two beside a river. The camera felt heavier than its size. Claire smiled through wet eyes. You're both looking in different directions. That also sounds right. Behind them, Everett cleared his throat. You engraved the left side too deep. Clara turned from several feet away. He did not. I am offering craftsmanship notes. You are holding your walking stick upside down. Everett looked at his hand. He was. Before he could recover his dignity, Patch rose, stepped toward him, and seized one of Everett's gloves from the snow. Patch, Grant said. Patch looked directly at him, then ran. Everett reacted first. That is government property. It's your glove, Margot called. I serve the government. Patch tore down the cleared trail with the burgundy glove hanging from his mouth like a captured flag. Miles went after him. 2 elderly veterans joined at an urgent walk. Dana raised one hand. No one runs on the bend. Everett followed, waving his bare hand and issuing commands that Patch clearly considered optional. The formal gathering dissolved. People laughed. Someone warned Everett not to slip. Patch circled a bench, dodged Miles with insulting ease, then finally returned to Grant on his own terms. He dropped the glove beside Nolan's marker. Everett arrived several seconds later, breathing hard and deeply offended. That animal has no respect for remembrance. Grant picked up the glove and handed it back. He brought it to Nolan. Everett opened his mouth. No complaint came out. Then he laughed. The sound moved down the trail and through the pines, joined by others until the ceremony no longer resembled a ceremony at all. By late afternoon, most visitors had gone. The sky over the valley turned pale gold. A light snow began to fall, soft enough that each flake seemed to hang in the air before touching the ground. Grant walked the path with Patch beside him. The stones held names. But beneath those names were terrible cooking, patient hands, bad singing, stubborn jokes, peppermints, harmonicas, birthday cards, stray dogs, and every ordinary detail that proved a person had been more than the day the world learned how to miss them. Everett and Clara closed the visitors' cabin behind them. Margot carried the final signed forms to her car. Miles checked one last rail despite everyone telling him to stop working. Grant reached Nolan's marker. Patch leaned against his left leg. A year earlier, Grant had stood in this place holding a blank stone because naming the dead had felt like surrendering them. Now he understood differently. A name was not a door closing, it was a way back. Across the clearing, the duty bag remained visible through the cabin window, hanging above the sign. No one here is only a name. Patch raised his head toward it. For a moment, Grant thought the dog would walk back to the cabin door. Patch only looked, then he turned away and followed Grant down the trail. Snow settled on the shepherd's dark back. Grant brushed it away. He had once believed snow erased tracks. Now he knew it only covered them until someone came looking. As long as a person returned to clear the path, read the stone, speak the name, and tell one true story, the road remained. And no one named there had to walk it alone. Healing does not always come by forgetting what we lost. Sometimes it comes when we finally stop carrying regret as proof of love. Grant, Everett, and Patch remind us that a name spoken with honesty can become a road back to peace. The missed call, the unopened letter, the memory we keep avoiding, none of them has to be the end of the story. May God give you courage to face what still hurts, grace for what cannot be changed, and hope for the path still ahead. If this story touched your heart, share who you are remembering today in the comments. And if you want more stories of loyalty, courage, and quiet healing, please subscribe and join us again.